The Punky's World. This is my review of Dark Side of the Ring. Saving Face. Brutus the Barber Beefcake. They call it Saving Face because of his accident. Which was pretty gruesome, I guess. So, Brutus Beefcake actually grew up with Hulk Hogan. His name is Ed Leslie. And he grew up with Hulk Hogan. They went to high school together. A whole bit. And Hogan got him into wrestling. And there was this woman that saw him. Just thought he was gorgeous, thought he was a Greek god. That's her opinion, not mine. So, well, we'll get back to her later. He and Hogan became known as a package deal. And everywhere Hogan went, he would bring Ed Leslie along. And WWF at that time had an idea to call him, they saw him as a beefcake. It's sort of like a female magnet, only they use a term for the female anatomy and the word magnet. Begins with a P, can also end in cat. Okay? And so, so yeah, it was, but a beefcake is supposed to be like this handsome and muscular dude that all the girls like. So they called him Brutus Beefcake. Well, actually, they came up with Beefcake, and him and Hogan were talking, and he said, this is ridiculous. And Hogan said, well, what about Brutus from Popeye? We'll call you Brutus Beefcake. He said, it took a while for me to be able to say it without laughing. And he became Brutus Beefcake. And so, things started off slowly, then they teamed him up with Greg the Hammer Valentine. A tremendous second-generation wrestler. His father, Johnny, had wrestled up until the car accident that broke Ric Flair's back, put him in a wheelchair. So, but he was tremendous, really tremendous. And, you know, a great scientific worker, his psychology, spot on, all of it. And Brutus was still kinda green, so it worked. You know, Brutus was the power, and Valentine was the finesse, and they were called the Dream Team. And so they were tag team champions and whatnot. Then they decided to split them up. Well, what the heck am I going to do? Well, they handed him those shears. And he went, what? Yeah. Brutus the what? Beefcake? The barber. Are you kidding me? You know, that was what he was thinking, because he had no earthly idea what he was going to do as a barber. What does this have to do with wrestling? And once again, Hogan talked him off the cliff. He said, Eddie, because that's what they called him. He said, why don't we do this? You'll end the match with a sleeper hold. You'll cut the guy's hair off. and he had become a fan favorite, so he was doing this to all the heels. He became a fan favorite or baby face, and he was doing this to all the bad guys or heels. So he became huge, and I guess before his accident, he was on the road to the title. Now this is him saying that, so I don't know whether that was true or not. Then, he was very popular, and at some point, like I said, his accident happened. They released him. And he worked the independent scene. He had his accident and they released him. So, to the accident. He was holding line for a parasailer, and Brian Blair was holding line for the parasailer on the other side. And as she came in, because the guy in the boat was so frustrated because he wanted to be done, that he just hit the gas, which caused, and there was no wind, which caused her to come crashing down. And as they were holding up the parasail, she came down. He turned around just in time to take her knees straight in the face, which broke every bone from here down. I mean, if you saw those x-rays, it was horrifying. His maxilla, which is your upper jaw, your fixed jaw, was actually ripped off of his skull. So he literally, in order to talk, had to hold his maxilla up with his thumb, like that, because his maxilla had been ripped away. And somehow he managed, with all these fractures, to keep an airway, which is a miracle of God. That's all I can say, is that he still had an airway and wasn't choking on his own blood and was still conscious. All of that, a miracle of God. And he pretty much told the doctor to either fix him or kill him because the pain was horrible. So the doctor knocked him out. He should have been heavily sedated by then anyway. While they were waiting for the craniofacial surgeon to come in. And he didn't know who he was. They told him, his stage name. That doesn't mean anything to me. He's this foreign guy, And he said, doesn't mean anything to me. And when he said the name out loud, his son said to him, Daddy, he's a wrestler. And, okay. And when I saw the size of him, I'm like, how did anybody do that to him? Because he didn't know what had happened at that point. He just knew he had a guy with a shattered face. And, so he went in and lots of screws, lots of plates, and managed to put things back together. He even managed to move the teeth in the maxilla, because they were still in the maxilla, and I guess the teeth were still in the mandible, which is the movable jaw, bottom jaw, back into place because they were still in the bone, what was left of the bone, back into place up here and down here. He said, my most pressing concern was, does he have an airway? And fortunately, he did. He said, then I'm thinking, okay, I have to protect his vision. So I have to repair things in such a way that his eyes work. So he did, and in fact, he was finally ready to walk the halls with Hogan, and one of his eyes literally fell out because there wasn't enough to hold it. And I guess they fixed that, but Um, I think as a nurse, you'd be, in your head, you'd be, oh my God. But it would have to be more professional than that. You would take it back into bed. We'll get the doctor right now. And you'd go and call the doctor and say, you need to come here yesterday. You know, this guy's eye sitting on his cheek. So, fortunately, all the structures that connect to the eyes are still connected, so he could still see. But, I mean, can you... So he probably had to just tighten things up a little bit. I don't know if that was another surgery or if he just reinserted it and did some stitches. I don't know. I know in the beginning they were stitched shut the first day because the doctor said that. And they put him in a medically induced coma for him to heal. But like I said, the first time he walked, gravity, his eye. So, he looks surprisingly similar to what he looked like before. His face is a little more round. Some of that could be because he gained some weight, but it is a little bit more, it's not as defined as it used to be, obviously, because all those bones are pretty much powder. In case you're wondering how they do that and not leave any scars on the face itself, well, it's very easy. They cut you from ear to ear in here so that your hair will cover it. They bring it down and it leaves the inside structures of your face. I know that sounds terrible, but that's how they do it. And he had met the woman that I talked to you about. I talked about what a beefcake he was. A few years before when she snuck into the bed. I love you. Oh, brother. Anyway, and he was living in the Boston area, and so was she. And he had been working at the MBTA, which stands for Metropolitan Boston Transit Authority, taking tickets. And he was doing this just to support his daughter. His marriage was ending, but to him, his daughter was the most important thing. And his ex-wife was from the Boston area, so when they were splitting up, that's where she went. He went there to be near his daughter, and and he couldn't wrestle, so he was doing that. And one day, he had a lot of headaches, as you can imagine, after what had happened, and he would use headache powder. Now, some people say it was cocaine that was in the baggie, but first of all, they would have figured that out when the person opened it and it splashed all over the place. When they tested it to make sure it wasn't anthrax, which is, I guess, what they thought. I'm surprised I don't remember that living here. And no, I don't live anywhere near Boston. I'm over an hour from Boston. But I would have seen it on my local news because all my local news comes out of Boston. Anyway, So, he didn't know he dropped a packet or whatever, and he was fired because of the hullabaloo it caused. And why would you pick up a bag of white powder and open it in the first place? Why would she do that? Why wouldn't you pick it up and deposit it into a garbage can? Although I guess it was during the anthrax scare times and whatever. but I wouldn't have opened it. Sure, I would have picked, well, I would have picked it up because I would have thrown it in the trash. Greg Valentine says it was cocaine, and he and his wife both say it was a headache powder. Now, a lot of people probably watched that and went, okay, BS. What's a headache powder? Is that even a thing? Yes, it is. Excuse me. I have a cough drop over here. Yes, I do. A headache powder is actually a southern thing. And since he grew up in Florida, he would know. The most common brand of headache aspirin, because that's what it is, those powders are aspirin, is something called Goodies. And they come wrapped in these little, each dose of the powder comes wrapped in these little paper wrappers that are almost like rolling papers kind of thing. And he may have taken those, opened one, put it in a baggie for easier transport. I mean, unless you want to transport the whole box, But yeah, they were common in the South. I actually learned this because Goodies used to sponsor shows on the Nashville network. And I said to my mother, what the heck is that? And both of my parents, being older people, said, well, yeah, back in the day, that's how aspirin came. And in the South, Goodies are very common. That's how they take aspirin. You'll see that all over the South more than you will here. And he's from Florida, for gosh sakes. The Tampa area. So it makes sense he would be using aspirin powder. And it's not something they would have been necessarily familiar with in Boston. But they should have been able to tell. Fairly quickly. Sorry about the cough drop. By testing it that it was aspirin. Also known as, it's an acid. I can't think of the name. But anyway, so yeah. So I don't know which it was because they didn't say whether it was tested or whatever. But they made him go to rehab, and trying to figure out on the camera which side the cough drop is in. It's in this side. Anyway, because everything's backwards. He said it was quite a production. And eventually he wound up back in Florida. Well, first after the accident, he was in California with Hogan. And after that whole disaster, he ended up back in Florida. But he had met up with the woman, her name was Missy. Not Missy Hyatt, although she was on there. Can I just say, Missy Hyatt has had too much plastic surgery and too many fillers. She was a pretty girl. Now her lips go brrr, brrr. It's like, goodness, Missy, why'd you do that to yourself? Anyway. His wife, Missy, well, she became his wife, she was on this dating site and she was talking about him for some reason. Oh, because she loved wrestling. And the guy said, well, you know, Brutus Beefcake lives, I forget what they said. She said, well, I live, that's not far. So she was able to get a hold of him. And she's, you know, and they talked via text. You know, my dream, she said, was to have an intimate moment with him, shall we say. And so he called her. He's like, okay. And it happened. And she thought it was one and done. But he kind of fell in love. So they ended up actually dating. And he would tell her she was his best friend. And she didn't understand what friendship had to do with it. And I guess he sort of taught her that. You know, that it's good to be friends. You know, that your partner should be your friend. And it's true. You know, my parents always said they were each other's best friend. That it's important to be a friend first. And you can build a love relationship from there. And so he understood that, she didn't. And he taught her that. And then he asked her to marry him. And they've been married ever since. She too has had a little too much plastic surgery and filler. These are my opinions, guys, but take a look at Missy Hyatt before and after. Yeah, it's horrible. And his Missy, I don't know what she looked like before, but anyway. So, they could do a Dark Side of the Ring on Missy Hyatt. And they should, actually. Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert. Gosh, I'm going to have to make another list, aren't I? Next week will be... Oh, and they talked about him coming to WCW and them running him through the ringer of different gimmicks. And finally, they dropped him. He went... No, they didn't drop him. He went home. He grew his hair long. He grew that beard. And he got as ripped as he could be. And he came back. And he was in the NWO with Hogan. And he was called the Disciple. Now, he said he was down to 5% body fat. At that time. Dude, you didn't even have a six-pack. Your abs were flab. How do you figure that you were down to 5% body fat unless it was all on your abs? Just my opinion, by the way. Which, by the way, for a man is okay. For a woman, that's too little. For a man, that's right about at the okay level. For a woman, you shouldn't be less than 12%. If you're less than 12% as a woman, you risk not having a period, and other issues that aren't good. One of the biggest of which is infertility, not having a period. So, anyway. Next week will be Harley Race. That's going to be an interesting story to say the least. And it looks like his son will be on. Because that guy looked just like him. So. I know Harley Race has been in at least one plane crash, a couple of different pretty significant automobile accidents. I'm trying to think what else. I'm not sure. But ultimately, he died of lung cancer. Now, I can guarantee you they're going to say it was because he was a very heavy smoker. And he was. Everybody knows that. But there are also genetic components to that. Not just smoking. Smoking can trigger it, but you already have to be predisposed. So. Oh, and I want to make one other comment about this episode. Man, was Greg Valentine looking rough. But I tried to remind myself the man is 70 years old. But it's hard for me to imagine that he's 70 years old. But he is. He might actually be over 70 because Roddy would be 70 this year. This coming month, actually. Roddy would be turning 70. April 17th. And I don't know if Valentine is a little bit older than him. I'd have to look. But looking rough. Like I said, I had to remind myself, the man is 70. This is not the same Greg Valentine that you watched when you were a kid. You know? So, this was a long review. Thank you guys so much for joining me. God bless you. I will see you next time. Please subscribe to both channels, where we are trying to get to 500 and 200 respectively by Memorial Day. Bye, guys. God bless you. Mwah.